Hey everyone, welcome to Intermediate CSS. We're also going to be talking about layout today, specifically two kinds of layout, mostly one of them. So let's throw up a whiteboard. Come on, man. There we go. And talk about it some. So we've talked about inline and block. Let's review that real quick. Display modes. Talked about inline and block. Volunteer to tell me what inline is all about.
An inline, you can fit multiple inline things on a single horizontal line, whereas something that is block takes up that entire horizontal space.
Yep, tries to at least. Think about putting a block element inside of an inline element. It can't take up any more than its parent allows it to, but it still tries to take up all of it.
Would an example of that, like a block inside an inline, be like a column of text?
Yep, could be. So like if you had, I don't know, these things, and then for whatever reason you make these inline, you could have paragraphs inside of those that take up the entire thing, and then still have other inline elements inside of them. Other questions about inline and block display modes? Cool. Let's add two more. So these are the traditional display modes. These go back long ways to like 95 or so. We have two newer kids, Flex and Grid. If you'll recall, HTML was all about marking up academic documents. That's white papers and stuff. Headings, text, annotations, all that kind of stuff. That's what all this was designed for. And then we started using it for applications. And so things like controlling our vertical space, which like doesn't really make any sense in terms of like a text document, all of a sudden becomes a lot more relevant. So with a Flex container, Flex is blocked by default. There's also a display mode called inline Flex. This has to do with the Flex container, but the magic that comes with Flex is what it does to its children. So if I have this, and this is a Flex container, I can dictate what the layout of the children, the direct children of this are. I could do something like, I have 3 children. I want them to be horizontally and vertically centered. That's an example of a Flex kind of thing. Another thing we can do with Flex, we can space things out evenly. I have 3 children. I want them to just be spaced out evenly left to right and vertically centered. So I can do stuff like that that I don't have an easy way to do with old school CSS. You'll see this very similar ideas with Grid. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But this core idea of you have a Flex container and Flex children. Your container can either be inline or block. The magic comes from how you control the children. Ask me some questions about that.
So the children inside the Flexbox can be pretty much anything, right?
Yep,
Okay.
absolutely anything.
And can you have multiple Flexboxes on a page? Like, can
Oh
you
yeah,
move those
tons.
around?
You can
Okay.
have flex boxes inside of flex boxes. Each one of these children can also be their own flex containers that flex their children.
So do you just declare flex as the display type of
Correct.
the element that you want?
Flex or inline flex if you want the container to be treated as an inline element.
And you put this or input this in CSS only. You don't need to adjust anything on HTML?
Nothing on the HTML.
Okay.
Also, the logical consequence of this is that these children, like their display type doesn't matter anymore. Like this isn't inline or block, it's a flex child. And so if you try to override it by setting the display type on the children, it doesn't do anything.
Okay, so that has the ultimate authority on that then.
Correct.
So the way you have them drawn right now, the two flex containers, they would each have to be flex inline for that to be like.
No, there's no assumptions. Like the flex, the default, which is like block style flex, implies that I could have a second container. So like, I can also put like a div or something here, or a span, or is that the overall container is being treated as block. Whereas if I did inline flex, which is way less common, it's saying that this overall container could be in line with other things. Other questions about flex parents and children?
So it would make no sense to apply a flex tag to the lowest child. Right?
Yeah, if it doesn't have children, there's nothing to flex. Cool. The core concept in Flexboxes is primary and cross axes. So by default, left to right is the primary axis. Up and down is the cross axis. One word flips these, so that's not like, it's not even rare or anything. It has to do with how should the content flow? Does it normally flow left to right? Well, then we should use this row style axes. If we flip these around, so up and down is the primary axis, and left and right is the cross axis, we call that a column style axis. So imagine a list of things that are going left to right. Those things are on the primary axis, so row would make a lot more sense. You have a list of things that are like boop, 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 boop. That would make more sense to call that a column style axis. So we have a couple keywords that go along with the primary and the cross axis. On the primary axis, we justify content. With the cross axis, we align items. These are CSS rules. Valid properties for either one of those. Center. That means that you just try to jam them all into the middle. Other valid things. Flex start. We don't say left, right, top, bottom, because the axis could be flipped. But flex start throws it all the way to one side, the left side of the axis, or the top of the axis. As you might imagine, there's also a flex end, does the opposite. My favorites, and the space between. Hey, this is driving me fucking crazy. Hang on. Echo, stop.
Kyle, these commands apply to both justify content and align items?
Correct. Another one is space around. I think there's one or two more, but these are the ones you'll use a lot. Say, all right, I want my children to all try to jam into the middle. I want my children to all go to one side. I want my children to all go to the other side. I want my children to be evenly spaced. The difference between space between and space around is pretty subtle. It has to do with whether or not, like, what one of those spaces would be. Space around is you cut that in half and put it on the beginning and end of it. That's space around. Otherwise, it's the same thing. It's evenly distributing things. If this is all you know about Flexbox, you can get mighty far. Ask me some questions about primary, cross-axis, justify content, align items, or any of the values that we can set those to.
Are those all flex display specific, or can you use space between stuff? Like
Only flex.
If you invert your axis, do you then have justify content moves up and down and a lot? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
And you can use both justify content and align items, right?
Correct. Just their effect flips whether or not your flex flow is row or column. There's one subtle difference between them. Otherwise, they're basically identical. All of these things that we're talking about apply to the parent, the Flex container. There are also a couple of properties that we can set directly on the Flex children. You can change your alignment with the align self property. You can't justify yourself. That wouldn't make any sense. You can override your own alignment. And if you're doing this semantically, does the content flow in rows or does the content flow in columns? You would never have any reason to break your own justification. But there's plenty of reasons why you might want to break your own alignment.
What are the increments for these? Like space around, do you just do like 10 pixels or?
No, justify content and align items are the keys. These are the values. So
Okay.
you say justify content center, align items, flex start, that kind of thing.
So wait, does that mean that you can manipulate the size of the space between and around? Like, oh, okay.
You
Gotcha.
do that with the container. If you
Oh,
shift the container, then the space is smaller.
Isn't the idea behind those to make like the layout dynamic based on the width, the like length of the page?
Yep, that's exactly it. Cool, let me show you what it looks like. Yep, there we go. All right, so don't follow along with this. I'll give you the code. We're going to make an index HTML and an app CSS. Throw the doc type on there. title. Give a character set, link in that style sheet. All right, and so put an H1 in here, and let's see if we can't flex some stuff. So I'm going to make a div. I'm going to give it a class. I'm going to give it an ID of 1. And I'm going to give it 4 children. And we're going to do the same thing. We'll just have a second one we can play with too. And for our items, we're going to give them some dimension. So we'll say they are a fixed width of 50 pixels by 50 pixels. And we're going to say that 1 is flexed, and we'll make them both flexed. And then, so we can see them, we are going to give each of these items a background color too. We'll make them green. So RGB 122 0, 120, 240, 0 is red, 360 is red, 120 is green. Cool. How about that works? Hey, there they are. I am going to take a look at these containers. Perfect. So some things that we can do with these. So this div, you can see it goes across the entire page. This one goes across the entire page too. I flexed both of them, but I haven't said what to do with them. So if I wanted to space these out, let's see. If I do justify content and flex start, exactly what it is right now. If, so I'm going to put this just on this one. Okay, so that's what it does by default. If I say flex end, they go all the way over to the other end of the page. If I say a space between, they do that. If I do space around, see how it like kind of cuts the distance between those in half and then puts it around all of it? Space evenly is new. I don't know what that does. Space between gets a lot of use in the Coverley household. All right, let's take a look at the cross axis. So if I add some size to these, height 200, let's do 400 pixels. All right, so now this container has some height to it. I can say align items center. All right, cool, now it's centered. I can say flex end, puts it down to the bottom of the container. Flex start, puts it up at the top. I can also, the space between, oh, actually, can I? No, I can't. You can't do space between with, or space around with the cross axis. That makes sense, actually. We can do start, end, or center. Worth noting that vertically centering something is something that you couldn't do for like 20 years in CSS. So like this is kind of a minor miracle that we can do this now. Yeah, there you go. That is Flex.
Why is it that CSS hasn't been updated and not like fully updated in a while?
It gets updated all the time. So okay, I'm gonna try to do the shortest version of this possible because it's a super fucking interesting answer. So you'll run across the term CSS3 kind of a lot. So it's the third version of CSS. Came out, I want to say 6-7 years ago. They worked on it for a couple years. CSS goes back to 95. It's like, I don't know, in like 90s era software release terms, every few years for a major release, that's not too bad. There is not a CSS4 and there will never be a CSS4. What happened as part of the CSS3-ing was the committee that makes CSS, which is called the WhatWG, split into a bunch of micro specs and micro teams that are allowed to release however often they want. So for example, colors is its own team now. The colors team doesn't have to wait for a big batch release. They can release as often as they want to. Layout is another team. I want to say units is a team, but that kind of doesn't sound right. CSS spec subteam. These are all the specs, but it doesn't have the different teams on them. So like box sizing, this is a good one. All the level 3 stuff came out as part of CSS3, but the box sizing, whoever is in charge of box sizing released an update since then. Media queries got an update. The latest one, ooh, interesting. Allows you to detect whether or not something can hover. So like if you have a mouse, you can hover over things. If you have like a pointing device like this, that can hover. Your finger can't hover. And so you can detect whether or not something can do that. Haven't had any new selectors in a while. Overflow is new. So yeah, that's how that works. The hot shit that we are that I think me and a lot of people are waiting for is a thing called subgrids. And that's how supported it is right now. But no, CSS is still like rapidly updated.
Okay. So they just made 3 open-ended, so there's really no need for like a whole overhaul.
Correct. After 3, it's split into like 8 different teams that can release anything however often they want. And they have been doing that.
Cool. Also, that's telling me I should probably get Firefox.
Well, I don't know. Like, there's other things that are like not well supported in Firefox. Firefox is usually fairly bleeding edge about this stuff, but like, let's see. They have IndexedDB. They do. Do they have shit? What's something that Firefox slept on? WebSQL. There we go. So Firefox is like one of the only ones that doesn't have it. Also Safari. Safari never has anything. It's the worst browser. But if you are open to browser shopping, Firefox is, I think, the best browser. The only things that don't work quite as well on Firefox are this. God, I'm just philosophizing at this point, but whatever. They're Google properties in particular. And there's a really interesting history behind that. And this is one of the reasons why you don't want Chromium to be the only fucking like JavaScript engine on the market. Because like it looks like there's all these browsers, there aren't. Internet Explorer is dead. Edge switched to Chromium. Chrome is Chromium, obviously. Opera is shoot. I want to say Opera is Quantum Firefox engine. Same as browser Safari, same as browser Opera. Android browser's Chromium. Opera Mobile is same as Firefox. Chromium, Quantum. UC browser's Chromium. Samsung is Chromium. QQ's Chromium. Baidu's Chromium. KaiOS is Chromium. So there's like 3 different browser engines right now. And one of them is fucking dominant. So the problem with that is the Web Standards Group goes, hey, we're going to drop this thing from JavaScript. We all agree? We all agree. And then the Chrome team goes, yeah, I'm so glad you guys dropped that, but we're not going to drop it. We're actually going to rely on it to make Gmail and Google Drive and a lot of these things be real fast. And so they're essentially using things that they committed to dropping from their browser to speed up some of their stuff. And so the result of that is like you use Gmail or something in Firefox and you go, this isn't as fast as it is in Chrome. But it's because Google is being evil. It was their slogan to not be evil.
Surprise, surprise.
This one in particular kind of has an interesting history behind it too, but whatever, we're way off topic at this point.
Sorry, I made you chase a rabbit.
Cool. Back to Flex. Primary, cross-axis. If I want to flip these, I can. I can say, like I said, for this Flex container, I can say Flex direction, and I can say column, and now they're flipped around. Pretty common to use the meta property for that, which is flex flow. Flex flow also specifies whether or not it should wrap. If it gets to the end, should I try to find a new line or not? So you can specify wrap or no wrap. Cool, that's Flex. If that's all you know about Flex, holy shit, can you do a whole lot of layouts a lot easier. Ask me some questions before I give you this code and send you loose on it for a sec.
So how exactly do you manipulate one element without, like, independently? I know it's align self, but I don't know how to get it to work.
Align self, flex, start. Like that.
But like, how would you type that into your actual CSS?
So right now, I don't have anything that uniquely identifies an item. Doesn't mean I can't do it though. So I could also say something like, give me the item that is nth child 3. And then I could say align self flex end, something like that. And then, so to run the server. Now it's got that rule on it.
Okay.
And if I make this bigger, look, third one's weird. Other questions?
So would you say that like the overall benefit of using Flexbox is because you've you can easily control like the position of its children.
Yes. You can make its children do things that we really can't with just inline and block stuff. We can space things out evenly. There's no good way to do that with just plain old CSS. We can vertically align things. There was no way to do that for a very long time. And we can do it in a way that stays pretty responsive. So like if I do something like justify content and the space between, like that, and then I turn on the mobile emulator, follows along pretty darn good. That's slick. More questions? All right, so your challenge. I'm throwing the code for this in the thread for this. HTML looks like this. The CSS. I'll give these some height for you too. Looks like this. Make the relevant files, and let's spend a couple minutes just playing around. See if you can get boxes to move around in a circle. See if you can align stuff in a couple different ways. See what works, see what doesn't work. So I'm going to give you a few minutes, just play around a little bit, and we'll talk some more. Go.
Is it light server or live server? Done.
Light server, LITE -server.
That isn't working. Of course. You can get that hyphen in there. Just light server with a hyphen, right?
You are correct.
So that's something I wanted to ask probably on the Denver Tech questions, but I've had to like reinstall NPM like 3 times to get my light servers working, and then in different apps it stops working. Is that because I'm like installing it in the wrong place?
Nope. Does anybody remember what causes that?
It's not in a zshrc file.
Bingo. So that little export command from that sort of poops out at the end of the NVM install thing. For whatever reason, that didn't make it to your zshrc file. So if you throw that at the bottom of it, that'll load it up every time.
Sounds good. But also, if your light server command isn't working, you can just open the file and it will open in your browser, right?
Not in my house. You're a professional programmer right now. Don't open the file.
So I
Start up an actual server.
uninstall it and reinstall it then?
To do what?
To get that command, that last little thing to install?
So to do that, that's the command for installing light server. If you don't have an npm, then you got to do that. Then you probably don't have nvm running, which is probably from that export command, which is
Like deja vu, because I did this last time.
that export command should be at the bottom of your .zish rc file.
Now I can run light server and it opens up in the browser, but it just says cannot get.
Cool. That means you don't have a file wherever you ran that command called index.html.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So this should be like, I can access that from the root, right? Based on that command that you just put in. So it should be just zish or .zish.
.zish, it should be in your home folder. Like so. So we go to my home folder. All right. Hey, there it is. And so if I opened it up, .zshrc, I got all this stuff that ohmyzish put in here. And one of them is that. If you were looking in your GUI finder, don't tell me. So I'll kick you out of this lesson right now. We don't use the GUI file finder. We're grown-ups, goddammit.
No, I'm in the terminal. I was able to find it through my root at using ls-a, but it's just not letting me cd into it.
Oh yeah, it's not a folder, it's a file.
Oh, so just at my root, post that export and that you wrote.
Let's be careful about using the word root. Your root is something different. Your root is this. That's the slash. The little tilde is your home. So you probably want to do something like code.zishrc.
Oh, okay. Okay, and then put that export command. Is there anywhere in particular to put that?
Somewhere
at the bottom?
at the bottom. Be the last thing. Somewhere in there.
Do you ever use the nano command to just edit the file directly through your terminal? I started playing around with that the other day, and yeah, it seems scary.
Nope. It's super easy. It's like Vim, except you don't have to learn anything to use it because it doesn't do anything. So you can just use up and down arrows, and then it literally has everything that you can do in Nano down at the bottom. That little tilde character, or sorry, the caret character is control. So if you want to quit, well, it's Control X. If some of the language, so like cut and paste, K and U, it's a little counterintuitive. You got undo and redo. Like this is everything that you can do in Nano.
Just to make sure I'm copying that zish command down correctly. So that should be an all one line thing, and it should end with that nvm directory /nvm.sh.
This is, no, those are examples of like the folders. This is what mine looks like.
Ah, shoot. Can you go back? I was going to screenshot that.
Sure.
Sorry.
Got it?
Underneath that comment NVM.
Yeah, everything, these 3 lines, that is all of my NVM related stuff in my zshrc.
Okay, so that's what I need.
Dope. Ask me some questions. What did you discover while you were playing around with Flexbox?
Hard to customize it when they're all named the same thing.
Well, fuck it, man. It's your file.
Yeah.
Put some IDs on them.
Not really a question, but this definitely helped me solve an issue on a website imitation that I was trying to do earlier.
Yeah, it's really hard to make a modern looking anything without Flex and or Grid.
Yeah, I thought like a minimalist styled web page would be easy to do, and it's not.
No, it is not. All right, so that's Flexbox. We're out of time for Grid, but I'll give you a hint at what it's kind of like. So I go to the Develop Denver site. Develop Denver uses a 9-column grid. So that looks like this. If I there we go. There's the grid. So nope. Did we stop using a 9-column? Fuck, guess we did. Never mind, it's a 6-column grid. So the idea is it lets you carve up something into these vertical columns, and then you can combine them in kind of interesting ways. So for example, you'll notice this logo up here, there's a row there and a row here. I can explicitly say, I want this to be contained within this part of the grid. There's other grids on here. Yellow background. Oh my God, Liz, I paid you for that? No padding. Utility classes. So you can see the grid in action there too. where you can sort of carve something up a little bit. Or let's see, let's take a look at this. So this thing over here starts in this little quadrant of the grid. You can say I want it to start on the first grid or on the second grid line here and go all the way to the third, fourth, fifth grid line. Just jam it in between those two things. And so that gets really handy with some of the text sort of stuff. And if you come from any kind of print design background, that is like this allows you to use that style of layout and like grids a lot more. Now, reason we do Flex first is we can do a lot of similar kinds of things in Flex, but it uses this exact same concept of parents and children. You make a container a grid, and then you can align your direct children to that. And then you can make those things grids and align their children and so on. Subgrid, that thing I was looking at earlier, allows you to make like a universal grid that you can align things to at any point in the hierarchy. And no one's done it yet, except Firefox. Cool. Questions?
So should we ideally want to be learning grid and flex kind of side by side, or can grid kind of take over?
So there's like some people who are like, oh, we don't have to do flex anymore. We have grid, which is short-sighted. Use them both all the time. If you can only do one, I'd say flex is probably more useful. And it's also a lot easier to understand. Grid has a lot more complexity to it. And so I wouldn't learn them side by side. I'd get really comfortable with flex, and that's going to make learning grid easier. And if you're like, fuck this CSS stuff, you only want to learn one of them, I'd learn flex. But if you're like, flex is so cool, I can't get enough of it, then like grid would probably be your next endeavor. By the way, I'm married. That's my wife.
I try to stay invisible.
Other questions?
If this is a rabbit hole, I can hold on to it for later, but how does SAS fit into this?
SAS is a superset of CSS, so all of this stuff is valid SAS also. SAS adds a bunch of things. So SAS adds functions and variables and lets us do like way more programmery kinds of things with it. And SAS, like ultimately, other than CSS subgrids, fixes every single gripe that I have with CSS.
So it's not a new language. It's like something that goes on top of CSS.
Correct.
Okay.
It's additional like syntax that you can use. If you just change the, like this doesn't work in your browser, but if you just change the file extension to SCSS, cool, you have a SAS file. All CSS is valid SCSS.
Okay.
I was kind of wondering if there are anything that you can add to CSS, kind of like how you were showing Lodash with JavaScript. Are there packs that you can download for CSS?
Kinda. They end up being way more frameworky. So like if we think of Lodash as a library, I could use Lodash and Ramda at the same time. You couldn't use React and Vue at the same time. That wouldn't make any sense. So like that's one of my like real quick razors for whether or not something's a framework or a library. Most of those kinds of tools are very heavy frameworks. So examples of those are Bootstrap, Foundation, Materialize. All of those are frameworks. And they share something in common that is like why, like I'm usually a, let's just go with the easiest way to do something kind of guy. I think almost every single one of those just encapsulates bad practices in CSS. Specifically, the one that they all do is a thing I call utility classes. That's what I was just whinging about with like what Liz did. Who's the last person to work on the development oversight. Things like full no padding. That's a utility class. it's not describing what something is, it's describing what you think something should look like. Whereas like header bar, that's describing what something is. It doesn't have any opinion about what it looks like. Yellow background, that's a utility class. And almost all of the styling frameworks work off of like that kind of idea, which I think is a problem. There are, so the solution to that is like use something like Sass and mix-in libraries. There's one of those that I looked at once upon a time called Bourbon. And it looks like, let's see if they have any examples of it. So like what you do instead is you move all of that kind of stuff into mix-ins like this. And so your HTML gets completely unfucked with, but you still have like a Lodash style library that you can use in your CSS. Bourbon, as far as I know, is the only library like that that ever got any traction.
Okay, so I'll add that to the list of things I need to go check out.
Cool. Other questions? So I was hoping that by the end of this lesson, you would be able to lay out stuff with Flex and lay out stuff with Grid. Didn't get to the Grid, but I feel pretty good about what we did with Flex. So hopefully you learned something. Have a good lunch.